Boy. Tales of Childhood, by Roald Dahl. Introduction. It's 1923. In a small village in Wales. Imagine a little sweet shop, the kind that seems almost magical to a child. Its windows are filled with giant glass jars of bullseyes, strawberry bonbons, and licorice bootlaces. To a group of young schoolboys, this shop is the center of their universe. It's what a bar is to a drunk, or a church to a bishop. But this magical place has a monster guarding the treasure. Her name is Mrs. Pratchett. She is a small, skinny old woman with a mustache on her upper lip and a mouth as sour as a green gooseberry. Her hands are the most horrifying part. They are black with grime, with fingernails that look like they've been digging in coal all day. And it's these very hands she plunges into the jars to grab the sweets you've paid for with your precious pocket money. She never smiles. She only speaks to accuse you of being a thief or to tell you to get out. For a young Roald Dahl and his 4 friends, Mrs. Pratchett is the very definition of a villain. They dream of a grand revenge, a plot so brilliant it would right the wrongs of every dirty handful of sweets she'd ever served. Then, one afternoon, they find it. Hiding under a loose floorboard in their classroom, among their secret stash of conkers and birds' eggs, lies a dead mouse. And in that moment, an idea sparks in young Dahl's mind, an idea of such genius that it would change everything. "Why don't we," he says to his friends, "slip it into one of Mrs. Pratchett's jars of sweets?" The plan is set. The target, the giant jar of gobstoppers. As one friend distracts her, Dahl, with his heart pounding, lifts the heavy glass lid and drops the mouse in. They flee the shop as heroes, triumphant in their daring plot. But what happens next is something none of them could have ever imagined. Today, we are opening the pages of Boy, Tales of Childhood, a book that isn't an autobiography, but rather a collection of true stories from the childhood of one of the world's most beloved storytellers, Roald Dahl. This isn't just a nostalgic look back, it's the origin story of a creative genius. It's the answer to the question, where did the mind that created Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG come from? The answer, you will soon discover, lies in sweet shops and cruel headmasters, in magical summer holidays and moments of shocking pain, in a family filled with love and a world that often showed none. By the end of our journey today, you will understand how the most vivid, shocking, and sometimes hilarious moments of our youth become the secret fuel for the rest of our lives. You'll see that the greatest stories often grow from the most unlikely soil. Book summary. The morning after the Great Mouse Plot, Roald and his friends walk towards the sweet shop, buzzing with anticipation. But as they approach, they see something is wrong. A sign hangs on the door. Closed. Peering through the window, they see the gobstopper jar is gone from its shelf. It's lying on the floor, smashed to pieces, with a dead mouse and hundreds of colorful sweets scattered among the wreckage. A cold dread begins to creep in. Why is the shop closed? Why hasn't she cleaned up the mess? The son of a doctor in the group, a boy named Thwaites, offers a terrifying theory. A shock that big, he explains, could give an old woman a heart attack. "I'm afraid you've killed her," he says, pointing a finger directly at Dahl. Suddenly, Roald Dahl is no longer a mischievous hero. He's a murderer. The school bell rings, and the boys run to morning assembly, their minds swirling with fear. The headmaster, a giant of a man named Mr. Coombs, makes a grim announcement. The entire school is to line up in the playground. Immediately, as they stand there in silent, terrified rows, the school door swings open. Through it strides Mr. Coombs, and trotting beside him, very much alive, is the tiny furious figure of Mrs. Pratchett herself. The relief is immense, but it doesn't last long. Mrs. Pratchett marches down the line of boys, her piggy eyes scanning each face. When she reaches Dahl and his friends, she points a dirty finger and shrieks, "That's him! There's another of 'em! There they are! That's the 5 of 'em all right!" The culprits have been identified. The 5 boys are summoned to the headmaster's study. Mr. Coombs is waiting, holding a long, yellow cane. But as he orders the first boy to bend over, a voice shrieks from the corner of the room, "Arter! Lay it into him! Let him have it!" It's Mrs. Pratchett, sitting in a leather armchair, bouncing with excitement, there to witness her revenge. One by one, the boys are viciously caned, with Mrs. Pratchett cheering the headmaster on, turning a brutal punishment into a grotesque spectator sport. When Dahl gets home that evening, his mother sees the scarlet and blue welts on his backside. She doesn't yell or scold. She listens to the entire story in silence. Then, she puts on her hat and marches directly to the school to confront Mr. Coombs. He dismisses her, saying she is a foreigner who doesn't understand British schools. So she informs him that she will be taking her son out of that school for good. This single act tells you everything you need to know about the woman who shaped Roald Dahl. His life was a fascinating blend of two opposing worlds. On one side, there was the rigid, often cruel, world of the English boarding school system. On the other, there was the warm, magical, and fiercely loving world of his Norwegian family. His father, Roald Dahl, was a remarkable man. At 14, he fell from a roof and broke his arm. A drunken doctor mistook the fracture for a dislocated shoulder, and, with the help of two men, pulled so hard that bones splintered through the skin. The arm had to be amputated at the elbow. Yet, for the rest of his life, Harold managed with one arm, becoming so adept he could do anything, even tie his own shoelaces. He only had one complaint: he could never master cutting the top off a boiled egg. This one-armed man, along with his brother Oscar, left their small town in Norway with nothing, determined to make their fortunes in a bigger country. They succeeded spectacularly. Harold established a hugely successful shipbroking firm in Cardiff, Wales, supplying coal to the steamships that powered the world. He was a man of great taste and intellect, a lover of fine furniture, a skilled woodcarver, and a passionate gardener. Tragically, when Roald was only 3 years old, his 7-year-old sister, Astrid, died from appendicitis. His father, who adored her, was shattered by the grief. A month later, when he himself came down with pneumonia, he had lost the will to fight. He died at the age of 57. Roald's mother, Sophie, was now alone in a foreign country. She had 5 children to care for and was pregnant with a 6th. Any ordinary person would have packed up and returned to the safety of her family in Norway. But Sophie was not an ordinary person. Her husband had been adamant that his children receive an English education, which he believed to be the best in the world. And so, out of love and loyalty to him, she stayed. She would honor his wish, no matter the cost. This devotion created a stark contrast in young Roald's life. The school year was filled with rigid rules, bland food, and the constant threat of the cane. But the summer holidays were pure magic. Every summer, the entire family would undertake a 4-day journey to Norway to stay on a tiny, idyllic island. They stayed in a simple wooden hotel where the lavatories were just a hole in a plank over a pit, but the breakfast table was a feast of 50 different dishes. They spent their days in a small boat, exploring the countless rocky islands, swimming in the deep, clear water, and fishing for their supper. It was a world of freedom, adventure, and unconditional love, a perfect antidote to the oppressive atmosphere of school. It was in this playful, loving environment that Dahl's mischievous spirit was nurtured. One summer, his older half-sister brought her new fiancé along on the holiday. He was a manly lover who was always smoking a smelly pipe, which he kept clamped between his teeth even while talking. The children found him annoying. One day, while exploring an island inhabited by wild goats, the man put down his freshly packed pipe to go for a swim. Young Roald saw his chance. Watched by his entire family, who silently approved, he emptied the tobacco from the pipe. He then found a small pile of dried goat droppings, crumbled them up, and carefully packed them into the pipe's bowl, covering them with a thin layer of real tobacco. When the lover returned from his swim, he picked up his pipe, lit it, and took a deep, satisfying puff. "Ah, he said. "There's nothing like a good pipe after a bracing swim." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the man let out a piercing scream and shot 4 feet into the air. His face twisted in agony, his skin turned white as snow, and he began choking and spluttering, convinced he'd been poisoned. The secret was eventually revealed by his laughing 7-year-old sister, and as the man rose to his feet in fury, The children all leaped off the rocks and into the sea to escape his wrath. This mix of shocking events and gleeful mischief was a constant theme. Dahl's life was punctuated by moments of genuine pain that seem almost unbelievable today. When he was 8, his mother took him to a doctor in Oslo to have his adenoids looked at. Without a word of warning or any anesthetic, the doctor took a long steel instrument with a tiny blade at the end, shoved it high up into the roof of Dahl's mouth, gave a few quick twists, and a whole mass of bloody flesh tumbled out into a bowl. He was then simply stood on his feet and made to walk for half an hour back to his grandparents' house. Another time, the family went for a drive in their very first car, a massive de Dion Botan. His 21-year-old half-sister was at the wheel, with a grand total of 1 hour of driving lessons to her name. Roaring down a country lane, she hit a sharp bend, lost control, and crashed into a hedge. Every passenger was thrown through a windscreen. Miraculously, no one was badly hurt, except for Roald. His nose was almost completely sliced off his face, left hanging by just a thread of skin. His mother calmly clapped it back into place, held it there with a handkerchief, and directed the shattered family to get the car back on the road and drive to the doctor. That evening, Dahl found himself on the nursery table, where the doctor sewed his nose back on using chloroform as an anesthetic. These experiences, both the joyful and the terrible, were seared into his memory. As he moved from his prep school, St. Peter's, to the famous public school, Repton, at age 13, the world only became stranger and more brutal. At St. Peter's, he was so cripplingly homesick that he faked a case of acute appendicitis just to be sent home for a few days. He mimicked the symptoms he'd seen in his sister so perfectly that he fooled the matron and the school doctor, only to be found out by his wise family doctor back home, who sympathized with his plight and let him stay home for 3 days anyway. He endured characters like Captain Hardcastle, a master with a ferocious orange mustache who seemed to despise him on sight. One evening, Dahl broke his pen nib during prep. Not daring to ask the master for help, he whispered to the boy next to him, asking to borrow a spare. Captain Hardcastle exploded, accusing him of talking, cheating, and lying, and gave him a stripe, which meant an automatic caning from the headmaster. Despite his protests of innocence, he received 6 vicious strokes of the cane. At Repton, the system of authority was even more formalized. The prefects were called boazars, and they had the power to thrash younger boys for the tiniest infractions. The new boys, known as fags, were essentially personal servants to the older boys. Dahl had to clean his studyholder's room, a boy named Carlton, who would perform inspections wearing a white glove, searching for a single speck of dust that would justify a beating. One of the most bizarre duties was being a bog seat warmer. On freezing winter days, a boazar would yell fa-a-ag, and the last fag to arrive would be sent to the unheated lavatories to sit on the toilet seat for 15 minutes to warm it up before the boazar used it. And then there was the headmaster of Repton himself, a man who delivered savage beatings to boys, ordering them to kneel over his sofa while he slowly administered the strokes, pausing between each one to fill and light his pipe and lecture the boy on sin. After the beating, he would provide a basin and towel so the boy could wash away the blood before pulling his trousers back up. This same man, Roald Dahl notes with profound irony, would later go on to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, the man who crowned Queen Elizabeth II. For Dahl, the hypocrisy of a man preaching mercy and forgiveness while practicing such cruelty made him begin to question religion and authority altogether. But even in this harsh world, there were moments of unexpected light. There was Corkers, the eccentric math teacher who never taught math. Instead, he would have the class solve the Times crossword puzzle, or demonstrate how a piece of tissue paper folded 50 times would be thick enough to reach the sun. His most famous trick was to suddenly pretend someone had farted, yelling "Use door as fan. Open all windows," which was the signal for the entire class to create chaos while he serenely walked out, not to be seen again for the rest of the day. And most importantly for his future, there were the chocolates. Every so often, the great chocolate company Cadbury would send a gray cardboard box to each boy. Inside were 12 new, experimental chocolate bars. The boys were tasked with tasting each one, giving it marks and writing comments. For Dahl, this was a revelation. He began to daydream about inventing the perfect chocolate bar, imagining a secret inventing room in the Cadbury factory. It was a dream that, 35 years later, would blossom into the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. As his time at Repton drew to a close, Dahl knew he did not want to go to Oxford or Cambridge. He longed for adventure, for faraway lands. He wanted to work for a company that would send him to Africa or China. He applied for and, against all odds, secured a coveted position with the Shell Company. After 2 years of training in England, he was told he was being posted to Egypt. Dahl protested. "It's too dusty," he said, much to the director's astonishment. What he really wanted was the jungle, lions, and elephants. The company, surprisingly, relented. A week later, he was given a new posting, East Africa. He was ecstatic. At 20 years old, he sailed from London, leaving his childhood behind. He was headed for a life of adventure in a world of black mambas, malaria, and safaris upcountry, a world that would eventually lead him into the Royal Air Force as a fighter pilot in the Second World War. But, as he notes at the end of the book, that is another story altogether. The story of Boy is the story of how all these ingredients, the love and the pain, the mischief and the magic, the brutal teachers and the brilliant mother, all came together to forge the mind of a master storyteller. Commentary. When you close the final page of Boy, Tales of Childhood, you're left with a profound sense of wonder, not just at the wild and often shocking stories, but at how a person could experience such a strange mix of brutality and magic and emerge with such a boundless, joyful imagination. This book is more than a collection of memories, it's a blueprint for how a creative spirit is forged. The most powerful lesson here is about resilience, but not in the way we usually think about it. Dahl doesn't just endure the hardships of his youth, he transforms them. The tyrannical Mrs. Pratchett doesn't just become a bad memory, she becomes the archetype for all the glorious villains he would later write, like Miss Trunchbull and Matilda. The cruel beatings and absurd rules of the boarding school system don't break his spirit, they fuel a lifelong suspicion of pompous authority, a theme that runs through almost every book he ever wrote. He took the vinegar of his life and turned it into a kind of literary magic potion. This reminds us that the most significant parts of our own stories are often the most difficult. The moments of injustice, the painful experiences, the encounters with unkind people, these are not just things to be survived and forgotten. They are the very soil from which our deepest understanding, our empathy, and our unique perspective on the world can grow. Dahl teaches us that our wounds can become our wisdom. So, how can we bring a little of this magic into our own lives? Here are a few simple ideas. First, become the storyteller of your own life. Start paying attention to the small, vivid moments that make up your days, the funny, the strange, the frustrating. Dahl says these stories remained seared on my memory for 60 years. What moments from your life are seared onto yours? Write them down, not as a dry diary entry, but as a story. Find the hero, the villain, the humor, the lesson. By doing this, you're not just recording your life, you're starting to shape its meaning. Second, cultivate a healthy sense of mischief. Dahl's pranks, like the mouse in the sweet jar or the goat's tobacco in the pipe, were never truly cruel. They were acts of rebellion against those who were pompous, mean, or unjust. This isn't about causing harm, it's about refusing to let the world's seriousness crush your spirit. It's about finding playful, clever ways to challenge the status quo and remind yourself, and others, not to take things so seriously. Finally, recognize the two worlds we all live in. Like Dahl, we have our boarding schools, the places of duty, responsibility, and rules. But we also need our Norway, the places of freedom, play, love, and magic. Whether it's a hobby, a group of friends, or time spent in nature, it's essential to have a space where you can escape the pressures of the world and reconnect with the joyful, mischievous part of yourself. That's the part that fuels everything else. Roald Dahl's childhood shows us that a life of extraordinary creativity isn't built in a sterile, perfect environment. It's built from the messy, chaotic, beautiful, and sometimes painful reality of being human. It's a reminder that within our own memories, our own stories, lie the seeds of who we are destined to become. That was our journey through Boy Tales of Childhood by Roald Dahl. We've walked through the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary, no matter how detailed, is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The real adventure begins when you step onto the path yourself. The true magic of this book is in Dahl's own voice, in the way he makes you feel the thumping of his heart as he drops that mouse into the jar, and the sting of the cane on his backside. If any of these tales have sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's about feeling the thrill of a memory so vivid it becomes your own, and it might just change the way you look at the stories of your own life. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if this exploration has brought you some value today, a simple click on the like button and a subscription to Billionaire's Bookshelf would mean the world. It ensures you won't miss our next adventure into another book that has the power to shape a life. Let's continue this journey of growth together.